welcome back to Broken and Brilliant. I'm Carrie O'Toole with Carrie O'Toole Ministries, and I'm joined today by my friend Kim Stewart. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you.
Interesting. I call somebody up and say, hey, are you interested in being on a podcast? I've heard your story or whatever. And you actually messaged me and said, would you be willing to do a show about ADHD specifically for adults? And we started talking about it a little bit, and I said, well, how about you come on and share a little bit and we'll talk about it. So that's sort of how this whole thing came about. And so you're brave, first of all, I want to say. Thank you so much for being willing to come on and talk about this. So, why is ADHD important to you?
Because it had a tremendous impact on my life. And I didn't find out that I had it until 2 weeks before I turned 60.
Oh my goodness.
And by then you have endured many labels and incurred many failures in life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you never have an explanation. You're constantly saying, I'm sorry, for one thing after another. And it makes life really difficult. I read something somewhere that will help you and other people to understand. You know what it's like when you have a day when you get up and everything goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And first you can't find your keys, then you're running late, you're on your way to a really important meeting, now you're really scattered when you get there because you arrive late, you're starting out apologizing, and you're not anywhere near your best. Do you know what that feels like? That's what having ADHD is like every single day of your life.
So let's define ADHD. What does it stand for?
Adult Attention Deficit Disorder.
And the H is for hyperactivity
Yes.
as well. And so some people just have ADD.
Correct.
And some people have ADHD.
Correct.
And that includes the hyperactivity
Yes.
piece. So which were you diagnosed with?
The ADHD.
Okay. Now, see, you're sitting here like a regular person. Not old.
I'm taking that personally. Yes, I am. And I cannot tell you the act of will it takes me. One of the coping skills that I learned was, I'd say when I was about 50, actually. I got so tired of telling everybody, I've always known something was wrong and that the way I perceive life is different from other people. But with never having a reason, never having an answer, after a while you realize people are tired of hearing about it. You're kind of tired of talking about it. I happen to be a great mimic. So I focused on women whose characteristics I admired, and I mimicked them.
So if they would sit calmly, you would sit calmly.
Yes. Right now, like when we're talking, what I want to be doing is my hands want to be all over the place. I mean, they're almost twitching. They want to move so badly. But I know it's really distracting for people when I do that. So I'm kind of forcing myself to just sit here and do this. Now, fortunately, they've started me on some medication, and the dosage isn't right yet, but that is also helping me with it.
So tell us when you were diagnosed. You said just a couple weeks before you were 60. This is just a few months ago, a few weeks ago?
1 month ago.
1 month ago. Okay, so this medication route is totally different for you.
It is, and it's a real hard road. One of the messages I really wanted to kind of get out there is it's when you're an adult, especially an aging adult, they're finding more and more people like me and diagnosing them. And part of the problem was that when we were growing up, you were a behavioral problem. They didn't know that much about it.
Right.
And so a lot of people have gone through life not knowing that they have it. And so the medication takes a while to take effect, and you have to find the right one. And unfortunately for me, the ones that work the very best, I can't remember what they call them, but it's Ritalin and...
Is it a stimulant?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The stimulant drugs made me really sick to my stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so now what we're doing, there's a drug that's a non-stimulant, but it also stimulates that part of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called Stratira.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm taking that and a drug called Intuniv for the hyperactivity.
Okay.
And oddly enough, it's a blood pressure medication,
Mm.
and I don't have high blood pressure, but what they've found is that it helps to lower that
Just
impulsivity
kind
in
of
people.
calms
Mhm.
everything down. Wow. So you were saying that being diagnosed as a child or as an adult, you went through all these years of thinking that you had behavioral problems and having labels. What were some of the labels?
When I was in grade school, I was constantly talking, and it drove the teachers nuts. They said I seemed to be smart enough, but they couldn't get me to stop talking. When I reached junior high, it got more difficult because I got into some of the classes that require some of those executive reasoning functions,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly my grades plummeted, except in the classes where I was very stimulated, because there is a process that they call hyperfocus,
Mm-hmm.
where you do just the opposite. You focus on something and you don't, to the exclusion
Right.
of everything else that goes
And that's
on.
a misnomer because a lot of times you hear somebody has ADD, attention deficit disorder. It's not necessarily a deficit in attention. It can actually be a hyper focus in attention to where you can't pay attention to anything else.
And that's exactly what happens. So I would do great in things like English because I love to read, I love to write.
Mm-hmm.
But in mathematics and stuff, I was failing.
Mm-hmm.
So I got in trouble with my parents. I labeled myself stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I was constantly late when our neighbor would drive us to school. The father of some friends of mine drove us to school all the time. Well, I was always late. They were always waiting on me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, even if I got ready early, I would get distracted and start doing something else and I'd still be late.
Right, so you could have all of your books in your bag, your lunch is made, your clothes are all on, you've got everything that you need, and then there's something over there, and you get off over there, and the car has come, and now you still have to grab all your stuff, and you're still late.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what would happen. So by then, my parents were really frustrated, and I remember to this day my mom looking at me and saying, you know, I don't know how to do this. Can't you find somebody? Aren't there counselors or something at school that can help you with this? And the message that I kind of took from that is that I don't have the time for this, or you.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, as silly as this may sound, I didn't know how to go about doing what she was suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea who to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't, and I continued to get D's on all those subjects. If it was mathematics or science, I could not process it.
Mm-hmm.
I struggled with things like geography, but I could get some of that
Mm-hmm.
if it interested me
Mhm.
enough.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I reached high school, the anxiety part, the anxiety started actually in grade school.
And what's the anxiety over?
It can be over anything. The way that kicks in for me is, for example, when I was a little girl, my mother died when I was 3.
Mm.
So the woman that I call mother is actually my stepmother.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my parents would fight about me quite a bit. And I would curl up in a ball on the floor of my bedroom and just cry or shake because I felt responsible. And then I'd get focused on that and I couldn't get off of it. That feeling of responsibility, and I was at the center of everything, and what I did determined what all these adults were doing.
Right. So everything revolved around you, and yet nobody knew how to deal with you,
Correct.
and you didn't know how to deal with you.
No.
And so then you felt responsible for all of that, and you're just a little girl.
Right. And so by the time I reached high school, throw in hormones and dating and all of that into the mix, and it was terrible. My anxiety over the social interactions reached an all-time high. I couldn't talk to people or go out on a date without drinking to calm myself down. And I couldn't understand how other people seemed to be managing these things, and I couldn't. But at the same time, my parents were very busy socially, so they were not very involved in my life at all. So I kind of grew up on my own, putting pieces together, and a lot of those pieces that I put together were erroneous conclusions about life in general. So all I knew, and my dad, he was a genius. So to have a child that wasn't functioning well.
And it really had nothing to do with your IQ
No.
or your potential. It
No.
had to do with this ADHD and how your brain was taking in and processing information.
That's right. Because my IQ is actually quite high. So, but he used to get so frustrated. I remember as a kid I was trying to learn how to play the piano, but I couldn't keep time. And he would slam his palm down on the piano, counting out loud. And so I would just quit. So what I learned essentially growing up through high school was you can't do it. It's not worth the effort.
Why even bother?
Yes. In the meantime, I was getting in more trouble. My folks and I were arguing, and part of it had to do, they drank all the time. Part of it was their drinking. Part of it was the ADHD in me. So I wanted to get away from home desperately. I married the first guy I ever dated. He was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, and it was my ticket out of the house. And I married him impulsively. And on our wedding night, he threw me over the back of a car in Las Vegas and was going to hit me.
Wow.
It was a real wake-up call to life. I told him if he did that, I'd leave him. He didn't hit me, but we had a very rocky, very cruel 2 years of marriage.
Well, it sounds like you really had not learned the social skills and how to tell who's a safe or a person filled with character, good character, versus who's not.
I didn't have any basis for making those decisions. And so all I knew was I wanted out of the house. He asked me. I didn't know this was any different from what other people were doing.
You just thought this is how life is.
Yes.
And it's just really difficult.
Yes. So I eventually did leave him because the abuse continued. And but that landed me back in my parents' house again with all the disapproval and all the arguing. So I had a part-time job at the time, and this really nice guy used to come into where I worked, and he was nice. And I thought, this must be love. So we moved in together, and we eventually got married. Well, he was into using drugs, and I really didn't like it at all. I wasn't as much as I drank, I didn't like using drugs.
Right.
And I eventually left him because of it. So by then, I married and divorced twice before I'm 21 years old.
Wow.
I go into counseling, which was a smart move. I kind of could put things together enough to know that I needed help. But the problem was, because of some of the things that went on growing up, the death of my mother, I was molested in grade school. So there were enough things, the arguing with my parents, the drinking environment.
Right.
No one ever thought to look at just me and how I was dealing with life, or more
How your
how I
brain
wasn't.
processed all of that kind of stuff. They're looking at it more as you're a product of the circumstances that have been happening around you. So trying to deal with the grief and the craziness, the chaos, and all of that type of stuff, but not really looking at the chemistry of you.
That's right.
Wow. Which was probably partially helpful.
It was. At least I learned some coping skills.
Mm-hmm.
It was 10 years before I got married again. During that time I worked, but the interesting thing is work was really difficult. I was a secretary at the time, and it was back, remember carbons? I don't.
Yes.
So if you made a mistake, it was a really bad thing.
Yeah, because there were no copy machines. And so what you had to do was put a carbon paper in between the two papers, and you would write on one, and the carbon would then copy it onto another. If you made a mistake, you have to throw the whole thing away, get a new carbon. Well, you could reuse the carbons.
You could reuse them for a while. And that was before typewriters even had correction keys on them. So I spent all this time throwing stuff away, afraid somebody would notice how much paper I was wasting. Sometimes I'd make copies and I'd do something wrong, and I was afraid
I'm just
somebody'd
thinking
notice.
about computers now, and for all the people who have ADD or ADHD, what a blessing a computer is.
It is, in more ways than just that.
Yeah.
Actually, it can become their brain and help them to function.
Wow. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So, I mean, you've gotten us up through, the first half of your life, and then here you are at age 60, recognizing. Now, first of all, how did they diagnose you? What brought that on?
I had stumbled into an article about 2 years ago that made me think I might have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to my primary care physician at the time, and she told me that she thought I have chronic pain. I have I have nerve damage in my back.
Mm.
And so she thought it might be due to the medications that I'm on for my back.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a valid statement, and I really took it to heart. And at that time, she tried putting me on Stewart. She didn't use anything with it, and I'm guessing that the dose wasn't high enough. So I was on it for a while, and I did notice improvement, but I eventually went off it. I can't tell you why. I think it was because I thought, well, she doesn't seem to be really concerned about this. And this isn't to blame her, because I think she thought that if I really wanted to pursue it, I would.
Mm-hmm.
So another 2 years go by.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a life planner come over to talk to us about retirement and how to invest and all of that. And he sat there and he talked for an hour and a half and is showing us all these numbers. And of course, I can't focus on anything that he's saying. And I'm getting more overwhelmed and more overwhelmed. And then the thought comes into my head, oh my gosh, if something happens to my husband, I have to understand and do all of this. And he left, and I almost had an anxiety attack, which I hadn't had for almost 30 years now. And I thought, what is going on? What a strange reaction. And I stumbled. I believe in God, so I was just sure that God orchestrated this because I came across another article on ADHD. And I thought, I have got to go and have somebody that really knows
Right. A
diagnose
specialist
me
or something, yeah.
and work with me. So I found a psychiatrist in town that does that, and I went in and saw her, and we talked about my life, and she was so sweet. She smiled at me and she says, Kim, they've actually got tests now, which I found very interesting. They can test and tell you. Let me explain something first. The way ADHD works, people have a certain attention span. Let's say it's 2 minutes. And then, well, let's say for a normal person, it's like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe even 30. Probably closer to the truth. With ADHD, you have, say, like 2 minutes, and then you're out. And then you're back in for 2 minutes. So you get bits and pieces of everything that's going on, but you don't get the whole picture ever. So she was telling me that they actually have tests now. They can measure your attention span.
When you're coming in and going back out, okay.
And she said, you could spend a lot of money, and they could do this. They can do an MRI and show you the difference in your brain so that you see that this is actually a biological illness. And she said, but I can tell you from everything that you're telling me that you are a classic example. And then she said, but for your own knowledge, she said, let me give you this. And there was a written questionnaire that she has her ADHD adults fill out. And it's filled out on both sides. And I answered yes to almost every single question.
Wow.
And
So what was that like emotionally?
do you know, I was just stunned. And she talked to me a little bit about it. And she could tell I'd hit the overwhelmed level as she talked, because it was a lot of information and talking about the medications and everything. So we got done, and she recommended a book called Driven to Distraction. And I went straight to Barnes & Noble and picked it up. And I went home, and I started reading it, and I cried the whole time I read the book. Because there was story, after story of people just like me. And I said, this is my life. And I felt, pardon me, I felt a certain amount of grief. And I thought, what would my life have been? What could my life have been had someone known sooner? But that feeling of grief was greatly offset by an enormous sense of relief.
Yeah, I was wondering to finally have it make sense. And to know that you're not just crazy, or it's not just in your imagination, but there truly is something here. It's in your brain. It's how your brain functions. Other people have this. You're not alone. Somebody understands it and knows what to do about it.
Yes.
That must just feel like you have a whole new lease on life.
And I felt redeemed for all the people that had said, you're just not listening. You're not paying attention, because I forget. I lose things. For people that meet me over and over again and I still can't remember their name, because that's one of the classic things I do. The minute I meet somebody, I forget their name.
Right.
Immediately. And
I do that too, and I don't have ADHD, but
I know a lot of people have trouble with names, and so this is, it's like on steroids.
Right.
And I'll space out, or when I'm working on my novel and I'm deeply engrossed, hours and hours can go by and I won't even be aware of it. So I've learned to set a timer so that I know when to quit.
Because you're a writer, which we really didn't talk about,
Right.
but that's where we met, is in a writing group.
Right.
And, you know, Kim, I've known you for a couple of years now. I had no idea. In fact, when you think of typical ADHD, I'm thinking of little boys in classrooms who cannot sit at the desk, and so they're bouncing around off the walls and can't wait till recess. That's kind of the typical what you think of for ADHD. You don't think of 60-year-old women sitting very quietly and patiently in a writer's group because you look and acted just like everyone else in the group. So I had no idea that there were all these internal struggles going on just so that you could be a part of the group.
Right.
I had no idea what it would take for you to do that.
It took enormous courage for me to even go the first time. I was just so nervous, but I love writing. So it was offset by that. It was worth the social struggle.
Right.
And once I get to know people, it's so much easier. But to put myself out there is really difficult for me.
So now that you know that you have this, you've done some research, you're working at least figuring out the medication so that it can give you the greatest benefit possible. What are some of the things that you could offer to others maybe struggling with ADHD? What are some coping mechanisms that you've found, things that have made your life a little bit easier, shortcuts or things that you do so that you can function better?
Okay. They say, and I found it to be true for me, that diagnosis is one of the best treatments there is.
Just knowing that you have it?
Right. And I can give you an example. I used to, and I'm not proud of this, get behind the wheel of a car and I'd be reaching for drinks and adjusting my iPhone, sometimes at 75 miles an hour, figuring out what I wanted to do. And I think about it now and I just shudder at some of the things that I would do behind the wheel of a car. And now I get into the car and it's like I say to myself, Kim, you have ADHD.
You can't do that.
Don't touch anything. Coming out here, a song came on. I hook everything up before I leave, and a song came on that I didn't like, and my right hand kept wanting to just go and change it. And it's like, no, you can't do that anymore. And it helps just knowing that. The other thing that has helped me is they have wonderful timers out now, some of them designed for people with ADHD. But I'll set a timer. Well, I have a calendar for each day, and I plot out sections of time that I'm going to do different things. And then I work at keeping that. And sometimes it's real work, and I try not to cram too much into it so I can be successful at getting this stuff done. I make a real effort if I start something now and I start to walk away of saying, no, I need to finish what I started, instead of having 15 tasks that are in progress.
Right.
Well, that's chaotic
I
in
would
itself.
think that the calendar could help because it can not force you can't be forced to do anything, but it can gently remind you this is how much time it's going to take to get done the things that you don't really want to do, but you need to get them done. And then it'll also help you with the things that you could get hyper focused on, and you could spend the whole day and forget to eat and not do anything else. So it's like, okay, cut this one off now, spend a little time on this, then maybe you can go back to this one that you love so much.
That's right. And the other thing the timer helps with is people with ADHD have no sense of time and no sense of how long a task takes. In fact, my husband used to laugh at me because I would always be late, and it would frustrate him, understandably, because I had no conception of how long it took me to get dressed and get ready to go and how much time it took to get somewhere. And one of the things you can do with the timer is figure out how long different tasks take. How long does it take me to do this, so that you have realistic
kind of back
expectations.
It up. Okay.
For instance, I learned that on the day that I'm going to the grocery store, don't try to work on the novel, because the two are both time consuming, and it leaves me feeling really rushed, and I'll end up literally rushing around trying to get everything done. And But I've also learned to block out times and just go, okay, focus on the novel. It's all right. Just let everything
Go
else
for
go.
it. Yeah.
I know ahead of time that when it comes to doing the paperwork associated with writing, the proposals and things like that, I'll probably have to have somebody coach me because that's not going to be interesting to me. You know,
The
and
writing of the story is interesting, but
Yes.
the work that it takes to get it published or to get it to an agent or all of those types of things, if that's not up your alley, so you could get this whole amount done and then do nothing with it.
I'm guessing because I don't like doing routine things over and over and over again. So I see having to put together the letters and mail out the packets as being a real dreary part of the process.
Right.
And so I know I'm going to have to commit to someone. This is what I'm going to do. And then keep following through because that's how you get published is you have to keep doing that process.
Right. Right.
That's true of many jobs,
Well, yeah.
just in general.
But for someone with ADHD and you don't realize, if you don't know that that's your struggle, I'm just sensing, you mentioned before that you could have a tendency to really feel like a failure in life. And I'm imagining that for anybody else who might be listening, whether it's a teenager or somebody in their 30s or somebody in their 60s, just recognizing they're hearing this and going, oh my gosh, this is me. I didn't have any idea, but yet my life has been so darn challenging all the time. I think it would be, I think you hit it right on the head, that there's going to be some relief in knowing what it is and knowing that there's something that can be done about it. But there also could be some real grief over that. Because nobody wants to have something wrong with them. Nobody wants to have something wrong with their brain or to be challenged in these different ways. And you may have been thinking your whole life, I'll get over this. I'll be able to master this. I'll be able to... And all of a sudden you realize this is not something I can just keep working at and it'll somehow get better. I mean, there are definitely tricks that you can learn, and there are skills that you can learn, and tools that you can have, like the timers and the calendars and all these different things, but it really truly is something that needs to be dealt with. What would you say to somebody who's just finding out or just recognizing through your story that this might be them too?
If there's somebody out there that thinks that this could apply to them, I think it's really important to get diagnosed regardless of your age. Some people say with older adults, well, they've been living this way all their lives. They're not going to change now. And I think that's such an unfair thing to say because nobody wants to be a failure. And no one wants to make life difficult for the people they're married to or for their families or for themselves. Plus, you look at all the end-of-life decisions people have to make. You have to be able to communicate your needs to doctors and medical staff, to financial planners. And you can't do that. The psychiatrist that I'm seeing told me, she said, Kim, this isn't about trying harder. This is a physical condition. You can't work your way through it.
Right.
So it's really important to find treatment. I think about when I went in, I developed, I have a nerve damage. I had a pinched nerve, and it was a real unusual situation, and they didn't find it for over, I think it was close to 2 years.
Wow.
By then the pain was totally out of control. And at the time I could hardly communicate. My husband was doing the talking for me, and I look back on that and I think, well, no wonder, because pain, acute pain, is overwhelming anyway. Most people can't think with acute pain. Add to it a scattered mind to begin with, you cannot tell people what you need. So it's really important to get treated as far as I'm concerned, no matter what age you're at.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for being willing to do this because, first of all, like I said, I didn't know that this was a struggle that you had. you're kind of coming out here sharing all of this with people, and to not know it until you're 60, I just can't even imagine the amount of pain that must have caused through your life. And yet you're still a young woman. You've got plenty of life to go. You're working on a novel here and trying to get it published. And I just think about the opportunities that maybe you've opened up for yourself that you wouldn't have if you just stayed in the dark about this and didn't face it and come to the reality and start to figure out what you need to do to change things. So for a lot of people, I think the idea of, well, you've lived this long with it, what's the big deal? Why don't you just keep on living? And for you to challenge that and say that, but there's so much more. Mm-hmm. There's so much more to life. Why would you want to live in a way that's detrimental and hurtful and makes you feel like a failure when you have a choice?
Right.
And you can finally do something about it. So
to me, it's exciting.
Yeah.
A lot of people look at turning 60 and getting older as it's downhill from here. And for me, it's like, it's the whole world of possibilities has opened up.
All these things that maybe you never thought you could do before, and now there's a potential that you could do them.
That's right.
And
And
you
I'm
still
so
have time
excited to try.
Yeah. Well, here you are on a podcast.
I never thought I'd be doing this.
So the book that you mentioned, I've read it, I have it, and I can't think of it all of a sudden. What's it called?
Driven to Distraction.
Driven to Distraction. And is there any other resources that you can think of?
There is, and I brought it. I don't remember the name. Let me look real quick because it was another one that was recommended. It's called the ADD Friendly Ways to Organize Your Life. And it's fantastic. It looks like this. And it just has all types of easy ways to structure time, to deal with everyday tasks in a way that for me I was like, now why didn't I think of that? And it's usually simple stuff, but it's things that just don't come to me easily.
Right. And so other people who have dealt with this, get them all together, put all these ideas together, get them all in one place. You don't have to reinvent it yourself. It's all out there. Go buy the book and make your life easier.
That's right. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I figure I don't have time to reinvent the wheel. I just want to use it.
Right. Well, Kim, thank you so much for joining us. I just think this is going to make a difference for a lot of people, and I'd love to hear from you if you're discovering this may be your child, if you're discovering this could be you, and it's made a difference in your life. Let us know. Write a comment. Get a hold of Kim or I and let us know that it's made a difference for you, because that's
We'd
so
love
important.
to know that.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And we will see you next time back here on Broken and Brilliant.